Hi, Grandma here, and I'm reading Snow Treasure. In the previous chapter, Helga, Lovisa, Peter, and Michael have gone to the cave where the gold is. They have loaded up the first sleds, and their servant, Per Garson, has disguised it all with ropes and canvas of some kind, sacks. And now they have to go. Even though the Germans have arrived, Victor thinks it's important that the Germans see the children out sledding from day one. Chapter 10. Soon would come the moment the four children dreaded, the first German entry. First German sentry. Per Garson said the Nazis were on their way to town, but the children had not seen them. The rest of the morning they had spent pulling the heavy sleds through the woods. They had to go almost all the way back to Rijswijk before they could begin to toboggan down the mountain. What would happen? What if the Nazis refused to allow them to go on? What if somehow they suspected and began to search the sled? Peter wouldn't let himself think of what might happen. He made up stories about the four of them. They were Vikings, and their sleds were Viking boats. They were sailing the seas. They would go far, far away. The very nearest they would go would be America. Peter, I'm hungry. Let's eat, Michael proposed when they were barely out of the woods. But Peter wanted to get a start on the long ride down the mountain. When Michael repeated his request a little later, he agreed. It's an idea, he thought. It would postpone their first brush with the sentinels. Girls, we eat, Michael yelled. They pulled up on a bank beside the road, their sleds in a cluster. They sat munching the dark bread, dried fish, cheese, and cold meat. Come on, Michael, race you to the lookout. Peter wiped his mouth on the back of his mitten. The lookout was where Peter and Michael and Helga and Lovisa had seen Uncle Victor the day he had so strangely returned to Norway. But now, when the four companions reached that point, it was not to be the scene of a snow battle, and all the fun went with it. Instead, there was solemnness and silence, and Lovisa's blue eyes were round with fright. The lookout today revealed an entirely different sight and one to strike fear into the stoutest. A German freighter was at the anchor in the fjord. Streaming up, she might be about to sail. On the beach that lay between the Atlantic Ocean and Rijswijk Fjord, there were hundreds of gray-clad soldiers, and there were others on the narrow strip of land between the big fjord and the small one they called the Snake. They were unloading enormous supplies because the snow was covered with bales, boxes, crates, and drums. Rifles were stacked in neat rows up and down the beach in front of the fishing pier. Sentries were goose-stepping while their companions worked. Whew! Peter drew off his cap to wipe his forehead. And now Lovisa was not the only one to be afraid. Fear looked out of all eyes. It was Helga who made them brave again. I'm not afraid of any goose step, she told. She shook her curls that hung like sausages from her hood. What's there to be afraid of? Come on, then. Peter straightened his shoulders. He drew a sled away from the others. Let's go. Look! Michael could not take his eyes off the beach. Soldiers marching right up our sled track. How will we get down? They turned back to the sight below. Michael was right. A company of men had started up the only road that led from the sea to the mountain. Well, we could hide till they passed, Lovisa urged. Or we could go down over the rocks, Michael suggested. But what would we do with our sleds? We couldn't take them down that way, Peter replied. We'll have to meet them sometime, Helga said. It might as well be now as later. Right, Peter answered. Uncle Victor said they were to see us today on our sleds. If we sail right into them, they'll see us for sure. Come on, keep to the side and try not to spill any of them, for that'd be bad for us. He fell face down on his sled. With a shove, he began the descent to the beach. The Germans were a long way off. The road made several turns in the miles between the lookout and the shore below, and only from the lookout could any part of the road be seen. So there was no way to tell if the Germans would turn off before they met them. Maybe they're not coming all the way, Peter told himself. Maybe they'll turn aside. But when he rounded the slope's last bend, he had no such hope. Directly in front was a company of gray-clad, goose-stepping soldiers. Even on the glassy surface, their legs swung out straight as rods. That's the goose step, is when they walk with their legs straight out without bending like most people march. Whew! Peter had no way to stop himself, and now he found he was headed right into the middle of them. He let out a war whoop, a warning he was coming, but the Germans were directly in his path. He didn't see how he could avoid knocking them down like 10 pins bowling. He was going to spill them all right, try as he might not to. It was the worst possible thing he knew. Near at hand, these grim, gray marching soldiers towered like giants to the boy on the sled. Down he flew, faster and faster. At 100 yards, he swerved toward the bank to avoid knocking down a whole row of men. A voice was barking a command in German, and the company took 3 steps to the side and out of Peter's path. His swerve drove him into the bank and stopped him, as he had not dared to hope. But he had already passed the first of the troop. Only their quick sidestep march had saved a collision. He raised his eyes from the snow. He was looking into the smiling face of a German infantry captain. "I turn my men aside," he said in Norwegian. "It is not right that we spoil your sledding. When I was a boy, I liked nothing better than sledding." Chapter 11. The blood rushed out of Peter's head. He was certainly dizzy. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he was looking up the slope at the heels of the last row of German goose-steppers. Michael and the girls joined him on the bank. "Well, what do you know about that?" Michael was open-eyed with wonder. "He turned his whole company aside." Lovisa found it equally hard to believe. Peter sat up. "If he hadn't, I would have plowed right into him. I might have broken my sled and the bricks would have spilled, maybe. The least that could have happened would have been to make them angry." Helga spoke thoughtfully. "We've been lucky, I guess," Peter admitted. "I told you there was nothing to be afraid of." Helga shook her curls. "When they turn out for you like that, they can't be so terrible. Come on, we've got to get to the snake." There were more German soldiers to pass before they could make the bend into the farther fjord that they called Snake. To these they would likewise have to come close. Nearest were the sentries that patrolled between the stacked rifles and the road down from the mountains. The sleds would pass within a few feet of where they walked. "If Uncle Victor wants them to see us today, he gets what he wants," Louisa pointed out. "They'd have to be blind to miss us." "Uncle Victor didn't know it would be as bad as this," Peter grumbled. "He didn't say they'd be marching on the road." "Well, we got past them, didn't we? Come on, Peter, let me go first. It would look even less suspicious if a girl went first." But Peter was head of the defense club, and it was for him to lead them wherever they had to go. No matter what would happen, he must go first. But he was still frightened enough to want Helga to take the lead. On their sleds again, the last mile before they would turn the bend by the cliff that hid the entrance to the Snake. The sentries were taking their stiff-kneed walks beside the rifles. The other Germans went on with their work of unloading the supplies. Nobody so much as looked at the children on their sleds. What if the sentries were to stop them? Peter asked himself. What if they wouldn't let them pass? The captain had been friendly because he himself used to like to toboggan, and anyway, it was not his job to be on watch as it was the guards. But when he went directly in front of the first sentry, he saw only a blank face. There was not so much as a look to show if he was pleased or displeased. Beyond the sentry, Peter saw some soldiers dragging a heavy tarpaulin over the snow. One of them looked in his direction. Under the round cap and fringe of yellow hair, he saw the bluest eyes he'd ever seen in his life. They seemed to say that he too would like to be sled riding. Another sentry was stepping up the line over the churned snow, and beyond him, another. Like the first one, they had only blank looks to give the children. None of them so much as lifted a finger to stop them. So they were going to be allowed to go on. Uncle Victor had been right when he said that no one would suspect boys and girls on their sleds. Peter breathed a sigh of relief and dug his heels into the snow for a fresh start. The cliff that hid the snake was just ahead. Beyond it would be safe from curious eyes. That day, anyway, would be one. The sleds would have to be dragged the rest of the way as the ground was level, but it wasn't far to go after the cliff was passed. They only remained to find the 2 fallen trees and to bury the gold and build the snowmen. In the snake, Peter stopped to get his breath. His sled was terribly, terribly heavy. He hadn't noticed how heavy it was when he pulled it through the woods from the cave. Now it was a fearful load. The others were close on his heels. They too seemed tired. Even Helga crept along, dragging her crushing load of gold. But where's Uncle Victor's boat? Peter searched both sides of the stream with his eyes. There was no boat in the black water. The trees! Louisa's eyes fell on a flat stretch that was closed in at 2 ends by a long ridge of snow. Here's one of them. She poked her arm to the elbow into the crusted white. Then she ran through the deep, untrodden stretch, and here is the other. The 4 of them began burrowing in the snow. 4 pits were made, and into each went the brown-covered bricks. Then 4 snowmen rose over the bricks. Each stood guard over a mound of gold worth more than 80,000 kroner, $20,000. So between the trees, $80,000 in gold bullion lay buried in the snow. "We've done it!" Peter exulted. "We passed them and they never guessed." "Dumb, stupid things," Helga's lip curled in scorn. "We did it! We did it!" Lovisa thumped Helga on the back and then threw her arms around Peter. And now none of them was tired. They pounded one another's backs and shoulders. They joined hands and circled round and round Peter's snowman. And the captain turned aside the troops because he didn't want to spoil our sled track. Helga burst out laughing. Oh, if he only knew! Tears ran out of her eyes. Weak from laughter, she could no longer stand and fell helplessly in the snow. In roars, the others fell down beside her. He said when he was a boy there was nothing he liked better than sledding. Peter choked with mirth. He likes sledding, and so do we. Oh, if he only knew. Well, there were a few pictures here that I failed to show you. Here's a picture of the children building their snowmen on top of the pits that hold the bricks. And here's a picture when Peter first met up with the soldiers on the road. And you can see they stepped aside to leave him room to slide by. Well, that was certainly good. They had a very lucky day. I just hope the luck continues. Okay, bye-bye.